In this lesson, we're going to look at the function Date.IsInCurrentQuarter. Now, this particular function looks at a date value and then checks whether it's in the current quarter based on the computer system settings. Now, this is part of a bunch of functions that evaluates a date or date time value against the current date. Others include Date.IsInCurrentDay, current month, current week, and current year, and they all work the same way with the same parameters. Now, what we're going to do in this video is look at a standard invoice report that we might run out of an AP system, showing invoices that as a company we might receive. We'll then take an invoice date column and then evaluate which invoices came in the current quarter. There's then a theme that we can develop further, moving away from that. Now, we're going to do this in PowerQuery within Power BI, although of course we could also do this in PowerQuery in Excel if, for example, you're using pivot tables and Power Pivot rather than Power BI. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the syntax of this function. First of all, we have the function type being date, as this function and the other functions that are similar, so Date.IsInCurrentDay, current month, these are all relate to date type data, and then the name of the function after that is in current quarter. Then after that, as our first and only parameter, we have the date value that we want to evaluate, checking whether it's in the current quarter or not. And that's it, no other parameters, nice and straightforward. When the date is in the current quarter, then the function returns a logical type, true. Now, if the date is not in the current quarter, then the function will return a logical type being false. So we've got a few examples here. The first one evaluates a literal, that's a single defined date, against the system settings. The literal date here is the 26th of May 2020, which is the date of the recording, and therefore this function would return the logical type true. It would return the logical type true because the current quarter is Q2 2020 and the 26th of May 2020 is in Q2 2020. Now, bear in mind please that PowerQuery assumes that the Q1 is January to March, Q2 is April to June, Q3 July to September, and Q4 is October to December. Now, our next function, our next example, simply evaluates every row in a column called invoice date, and then checks whether the date in each row is in the current quarter or not. The final example combines the Date.AddMonths function with the Date.IsInCurrentQuarter function. Now, this example looks through the invoice date column, and then adds on a month to the dates in the invoice date column, and then evaluates the result to see if the resulting date is in the current quarter or not. So, let's have a look at this in practice. Okay, so here we are in PowerQuery in Power BI, and I've attached my file to some invoice data. So we're going to work in the query here called invoice listing, which is a fact table showing some invoices that we received. So looking in the data set, we've got an invoice number, and then we've got a vendor reference and an invoice date, and this is the column that we're interested in. So let's imagine that we're going to create a report for a manager showing the amount of invoices that have come in so far this quarter. To evaluate each date, we'll create a new column. So to do that, we'll create a new column by clicking on Add Column. And then clicking on Custom Column. So here's my custom column menu. So I'm going to call this new column Invoice is in Current Quarter. So we've already got our equal sign in place. So we'll add the function name Date.IsInCurrentQuarter. And then open our brackets. Now all we need to do is insert our column name, which is invoice date, and then close the brackets. Okay, no syntax errors have been detected, so I'm good to press OK. Great, that's added our new column in at the end of the data set. Let's just check that it's done what it's meant to do and added some trues and some falses. Okay, so that's added a logical type true for those invoices where the invoice is in the current quarter, which is Q2 2020, but put false against those that are not in Q2 2020. Now we could leave this here, but one more little trick which we could do is convert this new column into a conditional column. Now we might want to do this as we might like to eventually use this column as a slicer in the report view. And in that case, it might be better to have yes or no rather than true or false as the return values. Now you could of course just replace true and false with yes and no. But if you're learning M code, then you might like a more elegant approach here. So to change the wording, we can go into the formula bar up here, and then after the each, put an if. Now this starts to change the standard added custom column into a conditional column. So after the end of our function, we can then put a then, and then a yes in speech marks. Okay, so that little section is then asking whether the date in the column invoice date in each row is in the current quarter, and if it is, then in each row to put a yes. So then to put the alternative, so if the date in each row is not in the current quarter, we can then put an else, and then put no in speech marks. Okay, that's our conditional column now finished. And we can see here in this column that the column returns no when the invoice is not in the current quarter, or yes if it is. So to finish off, I'll just put a comma and type text at the end of the expression, just to convert the data type into text.